Good morning, students. Welcome back to online classes. Today we are going to start our unit 3, Other Beings. Other Beings, it is related to science fiction. The things which are related to science fiction. You must have seen some movies on the TV which are related to science fiction, like Jurassic Park or your Avengers in the recent time. You must have seen these movies. If you haven't seen, you must go and see these movies on television. These are all related to science fiction. So here are some novels given to you, some names of some books given to you, and out of these 4 books, like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, The Invisible Man, Alice in Wonderland, The Ugly Little Boy, The Invisible Man and The Ugly Little Boy, they are the 2 science fiction based on they are the 2 books, storybooks, which are based on science fiction. Now here in this activity you have to write by whom you want to see. If you get the chance to travel in a time machine and go to past, whom you want to see, or if you get a chance to go to future, what do you want to see or meet over there. Now today we are going to start a new lesson, the section B, just before recess. Recess is the lunch time in the school. Imagine you get the sun for a day. What would you do with it? Tell your class about it. Now read this interesting story about a boy who finds a small sun inside his school desk. Parker kept a sun in his desk. He fed it gravel and twigs, and once his gum when it lost its flavor. The warm varnished desktop felt good against his forearms, and the desk's toasty metal bottom kept the chill off his legs. Now, Parker kept a sun. How can anyone kept sun in his school desk? Can you imagine? No, it's difficult. Sun cannot be kept anywhere. So, that clearly shows that it is a fictional story. It's an imaginative story. It is related to science fiction. So he was imagining things that he had sun in his desktop. So, and he used to feed him some pebbles. Pebbles are the small stones. He gave it to eat stones, small sticks, twigs, and once he was eating a bubble gum, and when the juice of the bubble gum was all gone, he gave that bubble gum, the tasteless, the juiceless bubble gum to that sun to eat. Now, the warm, varnished means polished desktop felt good against his forearms. Now, he kept his arms on the desktop and the varnished top, because the sun was inside the desktop, so the top felt warm to his arms. And the metal bottom, the toasty metal bottom, toasty means dry and warm, metal bottom of his desk kept the chill, the cold off his legs. Now his legs did not feel any cold because the bottom of the desktop was warm due to the presence of sun inside it. Today Mr. Earl is the teacher, was grading papers at the front of the class. Grading means giving marks. Every once in a while, glancing up at the 3rd graders. Now Parker was in which class? 3rd grade, 3rd class. To make sure none of them were talking or passing notes or looking out of the window. Now he was a very strict teacher. So now today he was marking his papers, sitting in the front of the class, and while marking his papers, he was keeping an eye on the students to check, to make sure that none of them is talking, none of them is looking out of the window, or none of them is passing notes to each other. Parker would quickly shift his gaze. Gaze means look down to his textbook, so Mr. Earl would not give him the glare. Glare means glance, the look, a sure sign that Parker's name would soon go up on the board with other kids who had lost their lunch privileges. for the day. He could feel Mr. Earl's attention pass over him with like a searchlight. You must have seen the searchlight in front of in the hands of policemen or the guards. So the torch, the searchlight is a torch which has a long beam, long light which can go to a very long distance, so that they can see what is there inside in the darkness. So Mr. Earl's eyes were also looking over, glancing over Parker like a searchlight, and Parker was not meeting his gaze. And as soon as he saw Mr. Earl looking at him, he used to shift his gaze to his textbook, and it was a sure sign that soon his name would be called up and he would be given punishment with the other boys, and he would lose his freedom during the lunch time. He would not be allowed to go out of the classroom. He would not be allowed to he would be forced to sit inside the class and not go outside the class and play with the rest of the students. Slipping a pebble out of his pocket, Parker carefully lifted his desktop a quarter of an inch and slipped the rock in. Now, slipping a pebble out of his pocket, Parker carefully lifted his desktop a quarter of an inch and slipped the rock in. It made a tiny clink when it dropped to the bottom. He leaned the desk away from him until he heard the pebble roll towards the sun, followed by a tiny hiss that meant the rock had vanished into. Now, slipping means he took out a pebble. Pebble means small stone out of his pocket, and Parker carefully lifted his desktop, the top of his desk, a quarter of an inch, 1/4 of an inch, and put the rock means stone, into it. It made a tiny clink. Clink means small sound when it dropped to the bottom. He means Parker, leaned the desk away. Leaned means pushed the desk away from him until he heard the pebble roll towards the sun, followed by a tiny hiss that meant the rock had vanished into it. Vanished means gone into it. The sun had swallowed the pebble. So he after intervals, Parker used to feed the sun small stones, small pebbles. Now, what happened? How did he find the sun inside his desktop? 2 days ago, he had opened his desk to put his lunch in, but instead of the pencil box, tissue box, and the books, he expected to see a cloud swirled in the space. At its center was a dull, pulsing red glow. He shut the desk and looked around to see if anyone else had noticed. An hour later, the dusty swirl in his desk had contracted to a bright spot in the middle. He cautiously moved his hand towards it. At first, he felt only the heat, but when he got within a few inches, the skin on his palm began to sting, like the flesh was pulling away. He snatched his hand back and then tried a pencil. When the point moved close enough, the pencil tugged towards the sun. It then snapped out of his fingers into the tiny light, brightening it slightly in the process. So now what happened? How did he find the sun in his desktop? This has been explained that 2 days ago, when he opened his desktop to put his lunch, he expected to see his books, his pencil box, his tissue box inside it. But instead of all these things, what he found? A cloud swirling. Swirling means moving in circles in that space. And at the center, there was a dull pulsing red glow. Pulsing means beating, like our heart pumps, the same way that cloud was beating. He shut the desk and looked around to see if anyone else had noticed this or not. So, an hour later, the dusty swirl that was pulsing in his desktop had contracted. Contracted means shrink to a bright spot in the middle. He cautiously moved his hand. He very carefully moved his hand towards it. And when he went too much near it, his skin on the palm started paining. Stinging means paining, as if it was burning. It was pulling away. He immediately snatched his hand back. Snatch means pulled away his hand back and tried with the pencil. And when the tip of the pencil went too much near the center of the swirl, the pencil just forcefully pulled out of flew out of his hands, and that sun just swallowed the pencil and started shining brightly in the process. Now the sun was as large as a golf ball. जितना एक golf ball होती है इतनी बड़ी, it was this big, just like a golf ball. When Parker rolled a marble across his desk, its path would curve. Curve means move towards the sun within, and sometimes circling several times before resting exactly above it. So when he used to put a marble, a pebble inside the desk, it sometimes it used to straight go to the sun, or sometimes it used to move in circle, then reach to that point. Parker, Mr. Earl said, your reading group is waiting for you. In the back of the class, his 3 reading partners sat on the mats, their books on their laps. Parker pushed away from his desk and joined them. Now, Mr. Earl had noticed that Parker was not paying attention on his textbook. Rather, he was doing something else. So, he called his name and told him to go at the back of the class and join the other 3 boys and start reading. Where's your book? Mr. Earl said. His eyebrows contracting. Contracting means came together, shrinking into a single line above his eyes. Parker shrugged. Shrugged means moved his shoulder, that I don't know. Mr. Earl growled. Growled means shouted. You need to be more responsible, young man. Go get your book. The other students looked on, relieved that Mr. Earl's attention was on Parker and not on them. Other students were very much relieved. They were relaxed that now they are spared, and Parker is the center of attraction for Mr. Earl. I do not have it, sir, said Parker. It had disappeared into the sun along with everything else. So how can he say this thing to Mr. Earl? So he said that I do not have my book. Mr. Earl's hands clenched slightly. Clenched means closed tightly. Parker cringed. Cringed means moved back in fear as his teacher pushed away his desk. Mr. Earl almost never left his desk. The students came to him. He did not go to the students unless the infraction means the crime, was terribly bad. Now, terribly has been used twice. So this means until and unless that crime is of extreme manner, Mr. Earl did not leave his desk. So that's all in this video. I hope you have understood the chapter till now. If you find any difficulty, message me or call me. Thank you very much.